Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero. And we begin today's podcast on a bit of a sour note. Something I said as recently as our last podcast, I was a bit agnostic on the topic of the top of the presidential ticket for the Democratic Party going into the 2024 election. And it appears that President Biden is very close to making the right decision about what to do going forward. I understand that he is angry. I understand that he is disappointed. But coming to this conclusion was reminiscent of deciding to take my father off the machines that were keeping him alive in the hospital about a year and a half ago. It was as difficult as making that same decision about my maternal grandfather who actually raised me. It's a difficult thing to part with someone who has meant so much to both the party and to us individually. He has been a fantastic president. There's no doubt about it. However, his ability to lead is being overshadowed by his ability, or his lack of ability, to campaign. And to add insult to injury, he has now been diagnosed with COVID. And when Van Jones of CNN, who should be fired immediately, first for his fake tears last Saturday for what we know, the shrapnel hit Donald Trump in the ear, and no one has yet to confirm that he was in fact hit by a bullet. It's just noise. As the two Pittsburgh police officers who were working security detail per request of the Butler Police Department and the Secret Service were also struck by shrapnel during the shooting that took place at the Butler, Pennsylvania rally. The RNC has been a complete circus, a sideshow, a perversion of what an RNC or the DNC should be. We'll get to that in a moment. Again, I want to emphasize the heaviness of my feelings about Joe Biden. Biden, for the most part, was a stand-up, solid Democrat in the Senate for 37 years. A reliable vote. An excellent leader on the Judiciary Committee. A man who helped pass significant legislation to protect women in particular. However, we can't undo that debate. We can't undo the George Stephanopoulos taped interview in which he still didn't look up to the job. Perception is reality. Furthermore, who wants to spend their golden years all the way up to the age of 86 managing the United States of America and leading the Western world? I certainly wouldn't want to spend my golden years doing that, especially with grandchildren, with a family to enjoy. I don't like the fact Hunter Biden has been there egging his aging father on to stay in the race, despite the fact it appears there's no way Biden can win this election. Furthermore, it appears he's going to drag the party down. When Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Emerita of the House of Representatives, and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries began to see signs that they won't flip the House if Biden is atop the ticket, which is absolutely imperative. And Senators Mark Warner and John Tester have had something to say about Biden remaining on the ticket. It appears that either Biden will make the decision himself to step away, or an entire chorus of Democrats in the House and more Democrats in the United States Senate speak out against his candidacy, or an attempt to cement his candidacy virtually on August 1st. Apparently, they have gotten assurances from the White House that roll call to officially nominate Biden to ensure he can get on the ballot in Ohio, which I wouldn't trust Ohio anyway. The Republicans who run Ohio these days are as extreme or more extreme than those that run state legislatures in places like Tennessee, where I'm located. A state legislature that is a pit of vipers, with the exception of the 26 or 27 Democrats who currently serve in positions in a super minority of positions in state government. They've run roughshod not only over Democrats in the state House and the state Senate, but they've run roughshod over Tennesseans who have been brainwashed into thinking that this is somehow the party of Jesus Christ and that they are putting Christian values first. Actually, they're putting Christian values on the back burner to promote an agenda of discrimination, sexism, putting their misogynistic foot forward as a bunch of men made the decision to strip away the woman's right to make decisions about her own body. Women's health care has been on the chopping block in Tennessee, and they finally got their chance with the Dobbs decision, and now they are harming Tennessee women. Fortunately, Tennessee is not very far from Virginia, unless you live in, let's say, Memphis, which, let's face it, over 1 million out of the 6.5 million Tennesseans do live in the Memphis area, a city that has had its struggles. And it's a 6.5, 7-hour drive to Bristol, the nearest Planned Parenthood, where a woman could access health care. Tennessee has now been dismissed, with the exception of Nashville. It's Nashville and the rest of a decaying state. Knoxville has the advantage of being near a tourist trap that includes Dollywood and the Great Smoky Mountains, one of the few national parks in this country where you can take an automobile. And believe me, the mountains, especially at high elevations like Mount LeConte or the Chimneys, have seen the terrible side effects of having cars in national parks, including acid rain and the death of so many different species of trees above a certain level. But back to Biden for a moment. Last year, just after my birthday in February, my father died, my biological father. He and I had not seen each other in a dozen years. It was difficult. It was difficult to be there, given the struggles that he and I had when I was growing up. It was difficult to see family, my aunts, plural, and uncle, my dad's sisters and brother, who I hadn't seen in 14 years, people with whom I was once very close, had suddenly gotten older. I saw gray hair. They saw gray hair. And what was their 25-year-old nephew the last time they had seen me? I had suddenly grown into a middle-aged man. And it was a bit shocking. It was heavy. As heavy as the moment when we had to make the decision as a family whether or not to stop the machines that were keeping him alive. It was a decision that didn't come easily to anyone in the room. And it was the second time in my life that I had to be involved in that decision. And I made that decision that it was time to stop this. He wasn't going to improve. He was going to be in that state permanently. And that was unfair to him. And it was unfair to the rest of our family. A family with whom I have not kept in touch, or have they kept in touch with me since that time. It was as if we only get together for these tragic events and then separate again for a decade or more until again something tragic happens and we don't see each other for a decade or more. But that's where we are with Biden. We're not talking about life or death. We're simply talking about asking a president who has been so incredibly effective, a man who saved us from a second Trump term, a man whose legacy is cemented if he decides to step aside, a man whose greatness as president cannot be questioned unless he stays in this race, costs us the White House, costs us the Senate, and costs us the House of Representatives, giving Republicans carte blanche to reshape the United States of America and to do nothing about the corruption on the Supreme Court. So it's time. It's time for either Vice President Kamala Harris to take the reins going into the DNC, and it's time for Biden to release his delegates. Delegates he did earn. People who did vote for him. But I do believe the party will coalesce around a younger, more capable candidate, especially one who will do what we expected Biden to do, and that was embarrass Donald Trump in what was perhaps Donald Trump's worst debate performance. A debate performance so riddled with lies it was hard to keep up, with Dana Bash, however you pronounce it, and Jake Tapper sitting idly by and doing nothing. It was a 3-on-1 debate at age 81 with a speech impediment and a terrible cold. But that whisper, that voice, has gotten so shallow over the last 2 years. The highlight of the Biden administration, public highlight, was his State of the Union address. It was fabulous. It was one of the great State of the Union addresses ever given, especially with a hostile MAGA Republican caucus in the House trying to cause all the trouble they could, only to walk into one verbal trap after another. Biden showed what sort of a statesman he was on that night, and it will be remembered fondly, especially if he, I want to say this as politely as possible, gets the hell out of the way and allows for either a mini primary, which we have financial backers prepared for that mini primary to allow the delegates to vote and decide on whom would be the best replacement for Biden going down the stretch. We all know who Donald Trump fears. We all know who Donald Trump does not want to see on that debate stage, who does not want to see atop the Democratic ticket, and that is California Governor Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom would expose the fact Donald Trump is not 6'3", but more like 6 feet, or 5'11", and just really fat, so it makes him look bigger. It would make him look like the old, pathetic man that he is on stage with a, let's face it, very handsome, blonde, 6'3", well-dressed, governor of the fourth largest economy on earth, right there with Germany. So a man who has the experience necessary to lead the United States of America and to leave many of the same department secretaries in place. I see no reason to replace Pete Buttigieg. I see plenty of reason to replace Merrick Garland with someone who is has more of a pulse than Merrick Garland. I see that. That I would understand. But we'll have to wait and see. It appears as though the walls are closing in on an angry Joe Biden, on a Biden who feels betrayed by a party that he's done so much to help prop up. But that's just where we are. Joe Biden, we love you. We hope that you enjoy your golden years. And we know that if you leave the ticket in the next week or so, that for the rest of your life, every time you enter a room, you will be met with a round of applause for the work you did in your one term as president and for stopping Trump from re-election in 2020. And doing so in emphatic fashion, winning states like Arizona and Georgia. States that were strictly just a plus. But again, our bench as Democrats is so deep. Speaking of Georgia, you have Senator Raphael Warnock. We have Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. We have Illinois Governor J.D. Pritzker. We have Gavin Newsom, as I mentioned before. We have Josh Shapiro, an excellent young governor of the state of Pennsylvania. So it's not a lack of options. It's not a lack of people who would make Donald Trump look foolish and stupid and stammering, which is exactly what he is, the convict that he is, who was celebrated in this Klan rally held in Milwaukee over the last 4 days. In this episode, we are going to end it with a little literature read by one of my favorite writers, a bit of a nihilist, certainly an alcoholic and a reckless man who was as anti-establishment as anybody who ever lived. And fortunately, he was a writer in the 20th century who didn't pass away until 1994. So there's plenty of footage, plenty of interviews, plenty of live readings from which to explore on YouTube. And that is Charles Bukowski. But again, we'll get to that later. Now that we've talked a little bit and touched a little bit on the heavy topic of asking Joe Biden, almost demanding Joe Biden, step away and retire at the end of this term, leaving his delegates up for grabs in either a mini primary or a handoff to Vice President Kamala Harris. I've actually had to pause this podcast because there are times for emotion. And this is emotional, as I think many of us Democrats truly love Joe Biden, and we absolutely hate the embarrassment, the constant picking at Joe that we've seen in the media, the unfair comparisons to a rambling madman who just makes more noise and makes it louder, although his noise makes no sense whatsoever in Donald Trump. The failure of the media to draw out these points and instead stick to their narrative that Biden's old. He's 81 and Trump is 78 with a whole bunch of comorbidities that Joe Biden does not have. Also, Van Jones and his comment about the bullet dodging. The bullet didn't stop Donald Trump, but a bullet we don't know even hit Donald Trump, Van Jones. But a virus stops Joe Biden. No, a virus didn't stop Joe Biden. His decency meant he wasn't going to expose a whole bunch more people who could be immunocompromised, who could have other health issues that could cause real problems if they caught even this milder variant of COVID-19. It's out of respect, Van Jones. Van Jones, who can go directly to you-know-where and kiss my you-know-what. Enough, Van Jones. CNN, fire him now. Your network is already in the toilet. While you're at it, get rid of Anderson Cooper, who's been there for 25 years and has been in third place all 25 years. There are podcasts that do far, far better than the Anderson Cooper hour at 9 o'clock on CNN. There are a few indispensable cable news personalities. Anderson Cooper is not one of them. Let him go spend his robber baron railroad money left to him by his grandfather, whatever, his mother, and leave us alone. The palest man in the world, Anderson Cooper. On to the RNC convention, and I could not believe that Terry Bollier, known to most of us as Hulk Hogan, was actually invited on, reminding us all of the film Idiocracy, when a professional wrestler and porn star, played by Terry Crews, was president. Well, we're about as close to that as we could get in 2017 through 2021 when convicted felon Donald Trump was president of the United States, and now he is an actual convicted felon. And the unity that was being talked about when it came to the RNC this year, the unity party, the party of unity. Unity, my rear end. Unity, my ass. You're handing out placards that read, mass deportation. How is that unifying? Or having raffles for AR-15s. The same gun that supposedly struck your God King, Dementia J, convicted felon Trump. And Marjorie Trader Greene and her angel flag reference, which is absolutely ridiculous. I implore you to look it up. Marjorie Taylor Greene, angel flag, Butler, PA. Look it up. This absolute crazy woman carried on about a flag and an angel that must have been protecting their God King, a convicted felon who was just nominated. He was just nominated to run for president by one of our two major parties, the party of Abraham Lincoln, the party of Teddy Roosevelt, the party of the rather dull and boring 1950s Eisenhower. That party just nominated a convicted felon who was also convicted of fraud multiple times, was convicted or found liable for defamation and sexual assault of E. Jean Carroll, not once, but twice, because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. A man who's on the hook to New York State for $465 million, as they allowed him to reduce his bond to $175 million for God knows what reason. A man who has yet to be sentenced by New York State, which is coming on September 18th, and God, I hope they give him 4 years. At least 4. I think 4 is the maximum he could give him in this situation, and Judge Merchan should absolutely consider it, considering the amount of fraud this man has committed on top of the criminal felonies for which he was found guilty in New York State. And there's no reason to consider anything the Supreme Court had to say, because the Supreme Court is about to be completely shaken up. Giving the president absolute immunity for all acts that occurred while he's in office means the Democrat who takes the reins after Biden and is elected president of the United States perhaps will be less likely to adhere to norms as Joe is. Because Joe was, he's been around since 73. He was elected in 72, turned 30 in 73, and was able to sit in the United States Senate to the seat to which he had been elected. Right after his first wife, his daughter, were killed in a car wreck in which his two sons, Hunter and Beau, were left in the hospital with fractured bones everywhere, waiting to see if his two sons were going to live or die. Fortunately, they lived. Tragically, his son Beau went on to die of a brain tumor in 2015. All of this is well documented, especially to those of you who are Democrats, progressives, liberals, socialists. We do have outright socialists in the Democratic Party, and I agree with a large portion of their platform. I agree with taking the student loan debt off the shoulders of working class children who were told it's the only way forward, it's the only guarantee to a middle class life, and it's been anything but. It's been a weight around their neck. It's been something they've had to struggle and wrestle with all of their lives, and that they will have to continue to struggle with the rest of their lives. They're not going to pay off a house. They'll be lucky if they pay off their student loans before they pass away. And the only thing that you cannot get rid of by filing for bankruptcy is, you guessed it, student loans. They stick with you. That's debt you have to continue to pay even after filing Chapter 7. Even after filing for bankruptcy protection, you still owe those high-interest, predatory student loans. Those loans you thought you needed or that you absolutely had to have in order to attend college and to hope for a better life. Instead, you're going to be stuck with that debt. That's just the harsh reality of it. It's unfortunate, but it's real and it's true. So, as we move forward, we can daydream on another episode about which candidate we'd like to see take Biden's place. I am 100% a Newsom guy, but I wouldn't be unhappy with any of the premier choices, the people who seem to be atop the list to replace Biden. If the delegates get an opportunity to vote, or they have some sort of a mini primary run that lasts about 2 weeks leading into the convention, I am 100% behind Gavin Newsom, simply because of the side-by-side photographs. The two men standing shoulder to shoulder, pre-debate, post-debate. It's humiliating for a fat, bald, comb-over, spray-painted orange, raccoon-eyed, convicted felon, adjudicated rapist, and fraudster who was gifted a dismissal by Judge Aileen Cannon, which is going to turn out to be the worst thing that could have possibly happened, because she will not get this case back once it is brought back to life by the 11th Circuit Court, where Jack Smith has already filed paperwork to appeal her dismissal. So the case will go back. It will happen at some point, especially if Democrats get out and vote in numbers too big to rig and margins they simply can't ignore. There are more of us in this country than there are Republicans, full stop. There are more people in this country who find the modern Republican Party nauseating than not. Full stop. It's a 60-40 split. It's just a lot of people who don't pay attention to politics, the people we call idiots in political science class, people who don't know their politics at all. They just go with whoever's most charismatic or whoever, floats their boat the last 2 or 3 weeks of an election cycle. People who don't get the news in the morning. People who don't read a newspaper or haven't read a newspaper at all. And I'm not talking about a physical paper. I'm talking about a Washington Post or a New York Times subscription. I guess if you're a right-winger who prefers tabloids, even the New York Post. But they don't do that. Instead, they surf Breitbart or Newsmax or OANN or the streaming service put on by Mike Lindell, the Pillow Man. You know, the Pillow Man with the mustache and the terrible accent? Yeah, that guy. The 2020 election denier. The birther conspirator. These anti-American forces are aligning themselves and wrapping themselves in our effing flag. It's the flag of the United States of America. It doesn't have a swastika on it, so why is it draped over your shoulders? Donald Trump or Mike Lindell or J.D. Vance or Nikki Haley or any of the rest of you absolute fascist traitors to the American cause. Let's see what's in our notes today. So, it appears that John Tester, senator of Montana, in probably the most precarious position of any senator, is joining with Mark Warner in calls for Biden to step down. This, along with visits he has received from Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi, definitely the savviest politician in Washington, D.C., a woman who really knows how to get things done and knows how to get her message across in a polite way, especially to the current leader of the free world and a man she has known for a long, long, long time. Think about it. She's 84, he's 81. They've both been in government all of their lives. So how close and what kind of friend do you think Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden are? Think about that for a moment. Those two have probably known each other for 30 or 40 years. Also, Lou Dobbs died. Lou Dobbs, who was over on Fox Business, the 2020 conspirator, the birther conspirator, a man who was fired from CNN after disgracing himself time and time again, then disgracing himself some more over on Fox News. Finally, after the election lawsuit from Dominion, the corporation that sued Fox News and settled for $787.5 million. Lou Dobbs was sacrificed in 2021 after that happened, which ended his career. And then he went on to work for that sack of excrement, Mike Lindell, on his streaming network, which I've never even heard of until I heard Lou Dobbs died. We also had some fact-checking from NBC News. That was posted on their Instagram and social media pages today as they finally fact-checked some of the ridiculousness spouted at the RNC, especially that disastrous speech given by Donald Trump, which rambled on for 90 minutes. The first 20 minutes, he took a more conciliatory tone. He wasn't as wild and unhinged as he usually is, as he tries to hold back, as he tries to pivot toward the middle and run away from Project 2025, which involved 200 of his former staffers, but apparently he's never heard of this 900-page manifesto, which is something apparently the Heritage Foundation has been working on, the Heritage Terrorist Organization has been working on since he lost the election in 2020. Perhaps they thought he was going to be reelected for sure, so they were working on it as early as 2019. I have no idea. All I know is that it's The Handmaid's Tale Season 7. It's a disaster. It's a nightmare. And here's a question. Sure, you had Dana White, who, basically runs a slave trade over at UFC. These fighters are left with broken bones, Parkinson's disease, brain damage of all different sorts. And of course, they hold Conor McGregor up as their example. Look, Conor's worth $100 million. Yes, $100 million he earned exclusively in boxing and a single exhibition match with the undefeated former welterweight champion Floyd Mayweather Jr. when Floyd won his 50th professional bout. It was an unsanctioned, non-boxing match against a UFC fighter who he took apart in 10 rounds, even with crumbling hands. And then, of course, we had Terry Bollea, like I mentioned before, the man known as Hulk Hogan, the man known to carry drugs, steroids, cocaine, pills, marijuana with him around in his fanny pack while he was telling children in the early 1980s through the early 1990s to take your vitamins, drink your milk, and say your prayers. And now apparently he's putting on that act for Dementia J. Trump, convicted felon Trump. I wonder how much they had to pay him to do that. Probably not that much, since he's been a corporate whore for, the better part of 50 years now. But it's not who did speak at the RNC or made an appearance at the RNC. It's who did not make an appearance at the RNC. What about the former president of your same party, George W. Bush, who's alive and well? He wasn't there. The vice president under George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, not there. Former minority whip in the House of Representatives, Liz Cheney, not there. Mitt Romney, the 2012 Republican presidential nominee, the last one since Trump sort of swept in 2016 and took over the party. And then, again, he was their candidate in 2020, and now he's their candidate again in 2024. So I guess 3 strikes you're out. Or former House Speaker, former vice presidential candidate who ran with Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan. Why weren't they there? Oh, because none of them believe he's fit to be president of the United States. They want nothing to do with him. They do not want their legacy caught up with his. And for Christ's sake, will members of the fascist right-wing MAGA party stop shooting at each other? I mean, we just had a MAGA right-wing deluded 20-year-old take a shot at convicted felon Donald Trump, and then they asked us to stop calling a fascist, to stop calling him anti-democratic. And last night he actually had the balls to say he's not the one who's anti-democratic. He's going to restore democracy. Then why did the Supreme Court need to elevate you to king status? Oh, to keep you out of prison in the January 6th trial that would have taken place back in March in Judge Tanya Chutkan's courtroom in the D.C. Circuit Court. Or Florida, which is probably the strongest case the government has against Donald Trump. And I guess under the next Democratic president, because I truly believe that as soon as someone else is nominated, someone younger, someone faster on their feet, someone who can catch and call out Trump's lies on the fly and get their message across in 120 seconds and look good doing it. Someone who's going to smash this Trumpism and rally Democrats, progressives, moderates, moderate Republicans, never Trump Republicans, who will feel okay voting for someone who has that type of youth and energy, ability, experience, whether they were Vice President Kamala Harris, whether they're governor of the fourth largest economy in the world, Gavin Newsom, whether they are a Midwestern governor, J.D. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer, or from Josh Shapiro, and what may be the most important state to win in the 2024 election. So there's a lot to think about, a lot of candidates to consider. It really depends on how this resignation is handled. And it seems to me that with visits from Hakeem Jeffries, with visits from Nancy Pelosi, with visits from groups of congresspeople, with groups of senators, that the tide has sort of turned, and unfortunately Biden's going to have to accept that he can't be our nominee going into the 2024 election. And I know he believes he can win, and I know he believes he can govern, but why? Joe, why? Why would you want to spend what could be some of your last years on earth? I mean, I hope you live to be 110, but 86 is pretty daggum old. Why would you want to spend all that time being president of the United States instead of watching the party grow and watching young Democrats come up and take the mantle and say, look, I'm this generation's Barack Obama. Now, might not be of African American descent, but I can bring the same progressive values to the White House. I can bring more progressive values to the White House because President Biden laid the groundwork necessary to make those things normal. $56 billion in funding for climate change. We can't afford a Donald Trump because we only have about 5 years to do something substantial about climate change. Gun control, gun violence. I mean, there's so much on the line. Our relationship with our allies, our relationships with Britain and France and Germany, and whether or not we're going to continue to push back against dictators like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, and, of course, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Or are we going to join them as a fascist state, a failed state, which would send the world into recession because the United States is, of course, the default currency? That's why we're able to run a deficit of $32 trillion, largely in part to Donald Trump's tax cuts, which will expire this spring of 2025 as long as we don't do something stupid like re-elect the asshole. And that's exactly what he is, a giant gaping asshole who didn't stop to check on anyone when bullets were fired, who didn't ask any of his Secret Service if they were okay. Instead, he made that rodent-like face, that disgusting face of his, and pumped his fist in the air. That's the real Donald Trump. That's who you just nominated. That's the freak show that was your unity rally. You can't have unity at a KKK rally. A KKK rally without masks at that. You didn't even hold back on your racism or hatred for American norms, for the United States of America itself, because when you speak out about some of these things and you talk about how much you dislike some of these things about America, you're talking about the historic American system. You have already destroyed the party of Abraham Lincoln. You've already destroyed the party of Teddy Roosevelt, destroyed the party of Eisenhower, destroyed it, pulled it up by the roots, set it on fire, blew it up with dynamite, and turned it into a cult of personality. And it is a cult. Make no mistake. If you are deep in the weeds of the Fox News media ecosystem, the Newsmax, the OANN, or you're going to some cult-like church that demands you vote a certain way, which should be enough to tax that church out of existence, because they have broken down that wall that separates church and state. And that's yet another reason to do something about this Supreme Court. And I encourage Biden to do it now. He's king. He's a king. They made you a king. So go enforce your kingly duties. Go enforce them. Go take control of the Supreme Court. Just cancel it out and make the D.C. Circuit, the mini Supreme Court, the actual high court of the land. Just dissolve it. It doesn't matter if it's constitutional or not. I mean, they've reinterpreted so many portions of the Constitution and laws passed by Congress. This Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, the worst, most corrupt Supreme Court in American history. Go ahead and destroy it. Then tear the building down. We'll build a new, nicer looking building when we get an actual Supreme Court. Or just go ahead and stick 6 more people on the Supreme Court. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The Constitution's going to be suspended by Trump anyway as he enacts Project 2025, which is the Handmaid's Tale on steroids, which bans basically everything, every guilty pleasure. It basically makes America a Christo-fascist state that only normal citizens have to abide by those rules, by the way. People who don't abide by those rules will be, the ruling class. Billionaires like Elon Musk, who has been deeply entrenched with the Trump campaign as he, hates his own family, his 11 children, because one of them is trans. And it was apparently that pushed him over the edge. And apparently that trans daughter won't speak to him for good reason. I mean, old apartheid Clyde, whose family's fortune had to have come from apartheid South Africa because he's from South Africa and he's in his mid-50s. So that means in his childhood, that was not, that was not the ANC running South Africa at the time. It wasn't. It was the remnants of the Dutch government from 300 years earlier running South Africa at that time when it was called an apartheid. And with the heaviness of today's episode, talking about Biden having to or needing to step aside, even though it's an incredibly painful thing for those of us who support the president and appreciate his 50-plus years of service to this nation, and service that I truly believe was in good faith. I don't believe Biden had some ulterior motive. I believe he wanted to be a United States Senator to help people. He accomplished that. I believe he wanted to be vice president to help guide a young senator who was just elected president through the levers of power, and I believe he did a hell of a job doing that and helped bolster the Obama administration, even though Democrats abandoned Obama as soon as he was elected. We just sort of sat back and smiled and said, we've got the White House, that's all that matters, right? No, that was the opportunity for Republicans to come in and sweep state legislatures, to sweep the House of Representatives, in 2014 to finally take control of the United States Senate. Because we just sort of sat back and smiled. Look at what we did. We elected our first African-American president. We're responsible for that. We're also responsible for completely abandoning him and his agenda as soon as he got in office and letting the masses of stupid that have now become MAGA, that was initially called the Tea Party, and you have people out, on tour running podcasts like Joe Walsh, who was part of the Tea Party movement and is trying to live that shame down and will continue to try to for the rest of his life. But now, as I promised, we're going to wrap up Saturday episodes with a little Charles Bukowski. This particular piece is a poem. Of course, he was known as a novelist, an essayist, a short story, prose writer, more than anything else. But his love, I would say his passion, at least post bleeding ulcers at age 33, was poetry. Free form poetry, certainly not poetry written in any academic way. And that's one of the things I love about him. Again, He's as anti-establishment as anti-establishment gets. And we need something for the arts in this country, some way of supporting the arts in this country, so that every film's not another spinoff of a DC comic book or a Marvel comic book or another Star Wars movie or Star Trek movie. I mean, I'm burnt out, but it's become so expensive to produce anything that there's no emphasis on, producing a film like, let's say, Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction, if you're a Tarantino fan, or films like The Network, or, films that I grew up with in the 1990s that were, had what, $1 million budgets, if that had one star come along and say, I want this movie made, and they had the clout to get it made. Now, even Matt Damon can't get movies made because it's just too daggum expensive. So, this piece is called Born Into This, and I want you to think about the foresight, what it took for Bukowski to have thought this far ahead before we wrap up today's Magnolia Media podcast episode.
Born like this, into this, as the chalk faces smile, as Mrs. Death laughs, as political landscapes dissolve, as the oily fish spit out their oily prey. We are born like this, into hospitals which are so expensive that it's cheaper to die, into lawyers who charge so much it's cheaper to plead guilty, into a country where the jails are full and the madhouses closed, into a place where the masses elevate fools into rich heroes. Born into this, walking and living through this, dying because of this, castrated, debauched, disinherited because of this. The fingers reach toward an unresponsive God. The fingers reach for the bottle, the pill, the powder. We are born into this sorrowful deadliness. There will be open and unpunished murder in the streets. It will be guns and roving mobs. Land will be useless. Food will become a diminishing return. Nuclear power will be taken over by the many. Explosions will continually shake the earth. Radiated men will eat the flesh of radiated men. The rotting bodies of men and animals will stink in the dark wind. And there will be the most beautiful silence never heard. Born out of that, the sun hidden there, awaiting the next chapter.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Born Into This, the long-form poem by Charles Henry Bukowski. And, of course, he was lovingly known as Hank. So, we're going to start having Saturdays with Hank here on the Magnolia Media Podcast, part of the Magnolia Media Network. Please, if you enjoy this podcast, support us by going to patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network. It's only $5, and when we get to 500 subscribers, I'm going to start doing a Friday newsletter just for you guys, full of expletives. Believe me, fired up full of expletives. But we're constantly giving you that Southern progressive Democrat point of view. We're Southern progressive Democratic voters. That's who we are. I happen to be one who studied political science in college. That's it. That's the difference. And I feel confident in coming on here and talking about the events of the day, especially in our current circumstances. Enjoy your weekend, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Magnolia Media Podcast. One more note, you can always check out my Instagram and check me out on Threads to know when I'm going to do a live. I do them almost every day. I do a live. We do a movie of the week. Again, we try to promote indie films. We try to promote award-winning films. None of this nonsense. None of this, whatever films I haven't even seen because I don't care about Marvel. I don't care about DC. And I know that there's that huge pack of nerds that really love that stuff, and I get it. It's entertaining, but you have to understand that it's garbage. It's artistic garbage. Let's promote the stuff that's not. Films like The Godfather, which wouldn't even get made today, or A Love Story, which came out of that same era at Paramount, or like I said the other night, we had The Network, or Good Will Hunting from 1997. The Network was from 1976, by the way. Or, it goes on and on and on. Recently, I watched The Paper that was just released on Netflix, starring Michael Keaton. Absolutely fantastic, with Glenn Close and Robert Duvall. Anything with Robert Duvall is pretty darn good. I mean, even some of the westerns we got in the late 2000s and the 2000s up to about 2010, like True Grit or 310 to Yuma. Excellent films that, mean something. They have some grit to them. Hell or High Water. I mean, first of all, Daniels is he not a blessing? A blessing to Hollywood, a blessing to all of us. What a wonderful actor. The dude, man. The dude, Big Lebowski, needs to be on that list of best films. Anyway, check me out on Instagram at Magnolia John 2024. That's Magnolia John, spelled John, 2024. We need to get to 15,000 followers. 15,000 on Instagram. We're working at it. We're working away, getting to our first 1,000 now. So join us if you will. Join us. We appreciate you so much. And again, thank you for tuning in to the Magnolia Media Podcast. Until next time, be well.